So it was very recently that the Underused tier held a survey regarding Grassy Terrain in Underused. And there were some options, people were deciding if Holucha is the problem, Rillaboom is the problem, who knows. In a very quick fashion, the Underused Council has decided to just straight up ban Rillaboom from Underused. Today I'm just going to briefly discuss what effect this shall have on the tier, as we didn't get to have Rillaboom featured on this channel for a long time. Nevertheless, as discussed in the intro, Grassy Surge is believed to be the reason why Rillaboom is a bit too difficult to handle in Underused. And it's not because Rillaboom is so uberly powerful. It revolves around a number of factors, and we'll discuss several of them. Besides the aforementioned Grassy Terrain, Rillaboom was a very easy to use Pokemon because it had access to U-turn. The Grassy Surge is a playstyle that, if you are going out of your way to work in tandem with, it can reward your team quite effortlessly. And with U-turn, Rillaboom made it very easy to get in those dangerous teammates, or helpful, bulky teammates. There are some annoying Pokemon that commonly run leftovers, and the added benefit of having the Grassy Terrain heal them in tandem with leftovers made the recovery resemble that of Pokemon that have the ability to just heal with a reliable recovery move. Heatran after leftovers and Grassy Terrain, and then one protection. A lot of damage could have been negated on such a defensive staple. Even something like Carmine Keldeo, if they manage to get a free substitution of one round of leftovers in Grassy Terrain, half the sacrifice they had to pay for the substitution has been negated, and in the second turn, when they're hiding behind the safety of the sub, all the damage more or less is negated. And even the bulky Cobalion could run leftovers to just keep itself in the fight a little longer. Another feature of Grassy Terrain plus the Rillaboom U-turn combination is that there were a lot of Pokemon that enjoyed Grassy Seed, the mainstay being Holucha. Holucha is known for its ease of use and in setting up with one single Swords Dance and outspeeding an entire metagame due to Holucha's massive speed stat. But many of the previous partner Pokemon were not that reliable for Holucha to come in safely and set up a Swords Dance to potentially win the game or break holes in the game for your team. There are other terrain setters that are legal in Underused, but the sacrifice you need to be willing to make use of a subpar Pokemon in another terrain setter like Indeedee, both male and female, Pincurchin if you are really crazy, or Galarian Weezing for that matter, it's not worth it more often than not. Rillaboom being a reliable Pokemon, plus with the U-turn combination, it made Holucha stand out a little bit too much for comfort for Underused. People were starting to fall in love with Comfey once more. Comfey's whole shtick was that you just cheese your way to victory once the steel types have been dumbed down and Terrestrialize has been broken, and people tended to run Comfey with max HP and max special attack, modest nature, because triage meant that your speed was irrelevant. Comfey always had to watch out for some obscure physical attacking hits versus a Pokemon that does not get one hit KO'd by its attacking healing prowess, by its healing attacking moves, like Draining Kiss and Giga Drain. Excadrill comes to mind, for example. But with the defense boost afforded to it by the Grassy Terrain and the weakening of Earthquakes from the aforementioned Excadrill, it made Comfey a little bit more difficult to deal with. Still not a grand Pokemon in Underused, mind you, but just an annoying Pokemon that even top players sometimes struggle with if they're not fully prepared for it. Became even more annoying with the Grassy Terrain in play. For some reason, people were adopting Latios with the Grassy Seed. Latios is a very, very strong Pokemon, good stats all around. It's weak on the defensive side. And with the Grassy Terrain giving it a slight defense boost, it was more than enough to justify a calm mindset and a defense boost with stored power if you were mad enough to do so or thought you had the ability to just set up. You could run Modest Nature on your Latios with a bit of defenses, with a bit of HP, mind you, and get some agility, calm mindset going if you really, really wanted to. And the fact that Grassy Terrain consumes the item of the Grassy Seed, knockoff was weakened a lot on the Latios, and U-turn didn't sting as much as it usually does, rendering one of Latios' best checks in Tornadus Therian not as instantly threatening in return to the Latios. And lastly, Manaphy was also enjoying the Grassy Terrain, soaking up all that reliable recovery and threatening to sweep with a tail glow. Manaphy is a Pokemon that's very difficult to take out in one hit. When you do heavy damage to the Manaphy, or at least take it for a chunk like half its HP, but the quick recovery that it was granted with Grassy Terrain meant that little bit of chip that you needed to defeat Manaphy, a beast like Manaphy, made it a little bit more difficult to take down. Enough of the good news regarding what Grassy Terrain benefited. Let's talk about some things that are so relieved that Grassy Terrain is finally going. And even though it wasn't such a big upset, to the tier staples, there were some Pokemon that were feeling a little uncomfortable in Underused due to the Grassy Terrain being in play. Greninja, for example, its sweep was cut short because of the Grassy Glide. Sand teams as a whole were put under a little bit of pressure as Tyranitar is weak to Rillaboom and doesn't appreciate the Grassy Terrain, and Excadrill can be picked off by the Grassy Glide irregardless of how many Rapid Spin, Swords Dances, and regardless of how mad your Excadrill goes. It could be picked off by Grassy Glide. And Rotom Wash, also a staple on sand teams, feared the Grassy Glide. Keldeo as well, despite its enormous special attacking stat and specs being great and Carmine leftovers loving the Grassy Terrain, if you were playing with Keldeo, you had to be careful because Grassy Terrain and Grassy Glide was going to be a double-edged sword unto you. So sand teams will feel a little less pressure in performing, and Greninja has it a lot easier on hyper-offensive teams once again, where it will not be picked off by the staple of Rillaboom and Grassy Terrain on the recently best hyper-offensive archetype and Underused. Anyways, with all that being said, what do I think about Rillaboom being banned? I think it's a good thing, to be honest. Grassy Terrain was relatively oppressive in the team builder because most people were spamming the daylights out of Grassy Terrain, and that is a playstyle you needed to be prepared for. The main problems you would run into is you have to be careful of your Earthquakes being weakened. You have to be careful of some random Grassy Seed, and suddenly your calculations on all your attacks are not doing as much as you need them to be doing in a game-to-game basis. And lastly, suddenly a lot of reliable Pokemon that was very good on many different team structures had to play vastly differently. I do sadly, however, believe that Rillaboom is going to be languishing in limbo. Not good enough for the Overused here, and the reason being is Overused does not need the Grassy Terrain as much as Underused can abuse it. When it came to Underused, Underused was focusing heavily on Grassy Seed spam and just having a lot of leftovers going their way, healing the Pokemon up quickly. Overused doesn't need Grassy Seed because the item of consumption is the booster energy. Photosynthesis and Quark Drive is mostly a feature in the Overused tier. There are some Photosynthesis and Quark Drive Pokemon in lower tiers, but they're not as common as many of the top staples in Overused. With many of the Photosynthesis and Quark Drive booster energy boosting Pokemon outclassing most Grassy Seed abusers, there's functionally minimal use for Rillaboom and Hawlucha. And even if you did manage to outmuscle the Photosynthesis Pokemon with your Grassy Terrain, Overuse features a number of other countermeasures that Underuse and the tiers below simply do not possess. Dragonite, for example, with its Terrestrialize boosted extreme speed. It doesn't matter how quick your Lucha or any offensive Grassy Terrain Pokemon gets. The fact that Multiscale can make sure it always takes one hit, it's a lot to ask for a Grassy Terrain team or any Grassy Seed boosting Pokemon to take on the aforementioned Adamant Nature extreme speed from Dragonite. That's just one offensive defensive example that Overuse possesses, rendering Grassy Terrain not as effective as it was in Underused. So there you have it, folks. Not too long of a video, but the grass from the Grassy Terrain has officially died down. They do not want us to touch grass in Underused because despite the tranquil and relaxing healing nature of touching the grass in Underused, it afforded so much reckless and aggression, but the Underused tier is not willing to put up with such a metagame. Folks, if you did enjoy this video, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you have not done so already, as we shall be doing a lot more of these. Let me know what you thought about Rillaboom and Underuse. What do you think about the Grassy Terrain as a whole? And what do you think of the ban as a whole as well? Is it something you would have supported had it gone to a suspect test? Or do you think this is a massive overreaction from the Underused Council, and we needed to spend a little more time just studying the effects of Grassy Terrain in Underused? I'd love to know your thoughts and opinions in the comments down below. But until next time, folks, we shall be U-turning out. Thanks for watching.